I'm Eve and welcome back to my channel. If me being face to face with you is a little awkward for you, don't worry, it's also very awkward for me. Since the vast majority of you guys voted for a voiceover, I tried so hard to make one over the past week or week and a half, and I just could not get anything right. I hated it. So here I am. This is the only way I can make a voiceover work in a manner that is satisfying to both me and I'm assuming you, because if I hated what I was making before, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't like it either. So without further ado, let's just get into it. How I study Korean, or should I say my Korean study method. He chose this moment. I'm really excited to bring this video to you because my main study resource is not a grammar book, it's not a vocab list, it's mostly entertainment. Now that I finally decided to take the TOEIC exam and I'm actually gonna register for it, I need to study Korean every single day. I need to make it a routine. I need to not study 5 hours one day and then not touch it for the rest of the week. Because we all know that consistency is key in language learning. However, I found that classical ways of learning aren't suitable for me right now. I'm balancing a lot of things between school, work, YouTube, and if I spend what little free time I have studying Korean in a boring way, then I'm left with absolutely no free time. That's the best road to burnout. I am aiming for a TOEIC 5. It would be amazing if I could reach it, but I won't be sad if I don't get it, or maybe I'll be disappointed, but like, it's not the end of the world. My general goal is instead to get as good as possible in conversations, whether it's texting or speaking. And I think that's quite reflected in the study methods that I'm choosing to use. On top of that, I would like to mention that I do consider myself to be at an intermediate level. Do with that information what you will, but you can obviously use any of these techniques even if you're a beginner or an advanced learner. It currently has, I believe, 7 components, which is, it sounds like quite a lot, but bear with me for a second. If you want to navigate throughout this video, here are the timestamps. You can also use the chapters on the timeline if that suits you better. It's up to you, but for now, let's just get into it. The main component and the skeleton of my study routine is to use dramas as my grammar guide slash vocab guide. What I mean by this is using dramas for learning is a thing that's commonly brought up, but it took me a long time to figure out a way to use the dramas in a way that wasn't totally annoying, and I think I'm about 99% there. In my opinion, obviously. A lot of people like to use the dual subtitles function on Viki or other drama platforms, but I hate that. I don't know if it's still the case because I don't bother checking anymore, but most of the times that I tried using it, the subs were out of sync. English subs were fine, but the Korean subs were out of sync, and to me that's really unbearable. So I'm usually only using English subtitles when I watch a drama. So there are 2 ways you can go about using this method. The first one being the annoying one, which is to write down every single new grammar point and word that you encounter. But that's really tedious and annoying. And you're gonna be spending so much time writing words down that you're gonna get bored after like 10 minutes. So this is only recommended if you're an advanced learner who knows pretty much all vocab that's used in day-to-day conversations. The second way to go about this, which is the way that I personally use, is to write down a new word or a new grammar point only if you hear it enough times. So you can set the frequency to however you prefer. I choose to write a new word after hearing it 2 to 3 times and a new grammar point after hearing it about 5 times. Obviously, this will vary. Sometimes I'll just disregard that entire frequency and just write a word down right away. For example, if I were watching Law School, which I know is around law, and I heard 변호사님 for the first time, I would probably just write it down because, you know, it means a lawyer or an attorney. And you know you're gonna hear that word a lot in that drama, in which case you want to know the word. I hope this makes sense. The good part about this method is that usually by the time you write it down, you're gonna have a general idea of what the word means. That is because you kept the English subtitles on, right? So the process of memorization is gonna be super easy. You probably won't even need to put it in your SRS system because you're gonna write it down, you're already gonna really know it. And in worst case, if you have a little blank, you can just refer to it really quickly. Once you're done with the episode, super fun, you gotta look everything up. And this is where I really like to have a book to gather all my new grammar points. That book is more like a collection of everything that I'm learning rather than a grammar book itself. But I just find it really helpful to gather everything in the same place. I would use Notion like I used to, but I realized that I'm a manual type of person. I need to actually physically write it down for it to stick. If I just type it, it doesn't do the same. So I'm just helping my brain a little bit. The second method that I use is songs, which is, I don't really know how else to call it because I'm using songs. This is how I use them. But the reason why I choose to use them is to improve my speaking, my reading speed, and also to increase my vocabulary. Once again, this is usually done in about 4 steps. The first step, which is optional, is to write down the lyrics of a song. I usually do this only for the songs that are just stuck in my head or the songs that I put on repeat in my car because I want to be able to sing along to them when I'm driving. It's like literally the perfect practice spot. But I don't want to be singing the wrong lyrics, hence why I'm taking the time to write them down. I'm noticing a little improvement though because I'm more and more able to understand the lyrics as they're singing it rather than having to rely on reading them. So I guess that's good, but I digress. The second step is to read the lyrics as the sound is playing. You have to read them out loud. It doesn't work if you don't. If you need to sing, sing. That's perfectly fine. I can't just read as the song is playing. I can't just say lyrics as the song is playing. This is way too weird for me. So I usually sing along, and what I'll do is I usually have a highlighter in my hand, and as I'm singing along, I will be highlighting parts that I'm struggling a little bit more with. The reason for this is not to learn how to say the song properly, but more to learn the sound combinations. There is a finite amount of sound combinations, and being able to practice them through songs is kind of helpful for me. Any little parts that I've highlighted, I will repeat a few times without the song, and then I'll usually play the song again and just try to see if I can now say it better as the song is playing, if that makes sense. The third step is to highlight new vocab. Once again, we are focusing on vocab because to me, learning grammar is great, but if you don't have any vocab, you're not gonna get anywhere. Anyways, let's get into step 4, which is to look up these new vocab. I'll usually keep a little space on the right of the song in which I'll be writing down all these new words. And my goal here is to make the memorization process as easy as possible. So I will be paying close attention to words that are related to the theme of the song. For example, if we take the song Alcohol Free by Twice, the first sentence of the chorus has the word 취해, which means drunk. And I didn't have to work at all to remember that word just because theme of the song, alcohol, first line of the chorus is literally saying I'm alcohol free but I'm drunk. There was no work involved, it just like went in my brain. I don't pay any attention to grammar in songs because I do know that songwriters like to be poetic and there are better ways to practice grammar, aka drama. The third main method that I use is to write subtitles. Now, this is specific to me because I'm doing YouTube. If you're doing YouTube as well, you could write subtitles. Actually, I wanted to create YouTube so I could practice Korean. A work in progress, but it's helping. If you're not doing YouTube, you can write in a journal. You can write a few sentences in your planner. You can also just use your notes app every night and write like 3 sentences to describe your day. They don't have to be complicated, but I would highly suggest you pushing the limits of what you can actually say. The way that I do this is really simple. I just go on Papago, Korean to English, write my sentence in Korean, verify that the English translation makes sense. Not saying Papago is perfect, but it's a good indication to know whether or not your sentence kind of makes sense in Korean. Now, usually this will be enough for me for about 90% of sentences, but sometimes there will be sentences that are just way too difficult, or I just don't know how to formulate properly in Korean, or I'm trying to use English/French grammar but in Korean, which doesn't make any sense at all. And so whenever I'm having these more struggling moments where I just can't figure out the sentence in Korean, I will do English to Korean translation, write the sentence in English, see what it is in Korean, and look for all these little things that I didn't know. I'm obviously trying to avoid writing down every single new vocab that I encounter because most of them can just be learned by practice. So often I will only take note the new grammar points unless it's a word that I know I have trouble with. Now once I'm done writing them down, I will erase the entire English sentence, go back to English to Korean translation, and try to write it by myself again. It's a little tedious, but it doesn't happen often, so I'm okay with this whole process being a little more annoying. Now obviously, if you know how to write the sentence in Korean without having to check, you don't have to do any work, just write it in Korean. My fourth resource is Instagram. Now, there is only one page that I know of that posts content that I actually benefit from. I will put the page right here so you can go follow him if you want to. I love this page because the vocab is mostly expressions and stuff that you won't necessarily see very often. Most of the other pages are more targeted towards beginners, and I'm not hating on them because there's a huge crowd of beginners and everybody who's on social media is trying to make it, so I'm not blaming them at all. But I do like to check his page at least once every few days and just take down the new words that he's added because the goal is to reach fluency. Not sure if I'll ever use these expressions, but if anybody around me ends up using them, at least I'll know them. Once again, I don't add these into my SRS system. I just look at them a few times every few days in my book, and that's good enough for me. Let's get into the next method, which is Korean stories for beginners. I think we pretty much all know this resource by now, so I'm not gonna spend too much time on it, but I still wanted to mention it because I have finally started to use it recently. I think I bought this book a year or two ago. I can't remember when because it's been way too long, but I've never used it. Actually, that's a lie. I tried using it. I tried reading a little bit of the stories and I got so annoyed by how slow I was at reading that I put it aside and didn't touch it again until now. As I was finding it more easily to read Instagram captions and read YouTube subtitles, I figured maybe it would be time to try reading it again. And to my surprise, my reading speed has improved so much. As we all know, reading speed directly correlates to how many words you know. Because when you read fast, you don't actually read the entire word. You usually read the beginning and guess the end. And it's fine when you know words, but I'm far from knowing enough vocab in Korean to be able to do that. But at least now I can read without too much blocks and at a speed that doesn't infuriate me. So I'm actually having fun reading this story and realizing that I actually do know more than I think I do. The way that I use this is really simple. The first thing that I do is a blind read of the story. I do not care if I don't know all the words. I do not care if I don't understand anything. I'm not actually paying attention to the content. I'm just trying to read it. The second thing that I do is I will go into the vocabulary section and read the definitions of the words that I don't know. Usually there aren't that many words that I'm not sure of, but I'll still write them down in the book once again. And once that's done, I'm gonna read the story once more. Now that I have the first exposure to the story, that I've had a look at the definitions of the words that I didn't know, I go in that second read with much more ease. So the reading speed is a little faster, and not only that, but I'm actually understanding pretty much everything. The last thing that I will do is just to make sure that I actually grasp the meaning of the story. I will be reading the English translation, and whatever sentence I didn't actually understand, I'll just read again in Korean. Little tedious, but it only takes me 5 to 10 minutes per story, depending on the length, obviously. So it really isn't that bad. The next method is, well, a resource. It's a grammar book. We all know it. It's pretty straightforward. I use Korean grammar and use religiously. It hasn't changed. I mentioned it in my previous How I Study Korean video. I'm mentioning it again because I love it so much. I love simple explanations. I need to understand what something does before I know all the little details. I do not care about the story behind the grammar point. I just want to know what it does. And I need to figure stuff out on my own for my brain to learn something. So I'd rather have a one-line explanation and a ton of examples and figure out the little nuances between examples rather than having a detailed explanation of all the nuances. And now that I think of it, I think I really love this research for the same reason that most people actually really despise it. Although I love it, I don't use only this one. I will also use How to Study Korean because when I'm looking up grammar points when I'm watching dramas, I just Google them. I don't bother looking into the book because that would take way too long. So I just Google them, And usually that leads me to how to study Korean. However, I do skip the entire explanation and just jump right to the sentence that explains exactly what I mean. Sometimes they will provide more examples that the Korean grammar I use doesn't, in which case I use this little grammar book that I'm making very pretty to the best of my ability because I'm really not artistic, and collect the different things to make one explanation for a grammar point, if that makes sense. So instead of having two different resources that I have to refer to every time I look up a grammar point, I just have everything at one place. I'm using this little grammar book as my reference, hence why I'm making such an effort to write prettily and make it not look too ugly, and hence why I'm not mixing it with the other big book, because that big book is not pretty and it's just a collection of literally everything that I encounter in Korean. But I digress. Last but not least, anki. And we all know what anki is. I also mentioned it so many times on my channel. Anki is amazing. It's an amazing SRS system. I know a lot of people hate it and prefer Quizlet. I just don't understand how Quizlet works. I didn't want to bother with it. Anki is straightforward, it's simple enough. I love it. And this is probably the part that most resembles preparing for the TOPIK exam, because the deck that I use should in theory cover the vocab that you need to pass all the way to TOPIK 6. Now, I'm not that far into the deck yet because I have not been using it for a while. I try to do a few flashcards every single day, but the thing is I've accumulated the reviews so much that I'm still playing catch up right now. And that's also part of why I'm not using it more lately, because who wants to spend 10 hours playing catch up on flashcards? I sure don't. That pretty much sums it up. I hope this video wasn't too long. I did my best to really say everything concise. I wrote notes for like once in my life. Well, I made them because I was making the voiceover, and then it translated into me not being able to make a voiceover video because it just didn't look great enough and I have to turn it into a video. Anyway, I hope this was helpful. Once again, I'm not claiming to have invented anything. I'm just merely using different techniques that have been talked about by other people, or maybe I think I came up with something that I never heard of before. If someone came up with one of the techniques that I mentioned and they need credit for it, like just tell me, I'll give credit. I have no problem with that. Now, I think this video is long enough. Let's just end it here. Don't worry, your regular scheduled program is coming back on Wednesday. Sorry I didn't upload last Wednesday because the COVID vaccine kind of killed me. And also this video was really tricky to figure out. Thank you so much for watching. If you really enjoyed this video, please don't forget to share it with a friend because that's what helps the channel the most. And also subscribe, leave a comment, leave a like, and follow on my socials. I'll see you next time. Bye.